Yeah, no one really wants to hear me before it's my time anyway, right?
No, no, it's time. All right, so welcome to our Pinhook virtual tasting, everyone. So my name's Oliver Maruda, and tonight we are talking about a very interesting sort of bourbon and rye producer. They just predominantly do bourbons, based out of Kentucky. So the time zone difference with the states, it's like 4 a.m. or 4:30 a.m. over there. So we've tried to get them on board. It's a little bit too early. We've had guests on from 6 a.m. sometimes, but this is just that awkward time of the year with Australian daylight savings that just doesn't quite align with their time zone. So they've apologized they couldn't make it. But we've got the next best thing, our American whiskey expert Scott Allan in town. So he's actually came back from a fresh trip over in the States earlier this year with Brock from Whiskey Hunt Australia and a few of our customers. So he knows all about the brand. He's been there, he's tasted it, he's chatted to the founders. So I will officially hand it over to Scott to take us through. One quick bit of housekeeping. Obviously, don't drink and drive. There's a lot of cask strength whiskey here as well. Feel free to add waters. We love your tasting notes. Any questions, comments, throw it into the chat. We'll run the poll at the end, and I'll share the link. We've got a few bottles up for on the website for sale as well. Otherwise, I will officially hand it over to Scott now. Cheers, Scott.
G'day crew, thanks Oliver. Yeah, we've got some cool stuff to taste today, guys. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll chuck the lineup in the chat, I imagine, but we're also going to just let you know here. So we're going to go straight into the Pinhook Straight Bourbon. So this is the core range bourbon from those guys. If you're ever looking for a bottle of that online, you'll be able to find very bright orange top there. So after the core range bourbon, we'll go into the rye, the straight rye. After that, the cask strength bourbon, which is a 5-year-old, into the vertical series bourbon, then a vertical series single barrel bourbon, and we'll polish it off with the vertical series 8-year-old single barrel rye. So if you do have multiple glasses, please do feel free to utilize them and come back and smell things later. Particularly interesting with the vertical to compare different year releases. But if you don't have those, that's totally fine. We'll make do. So, guys, has anybody here had Pinhook before? Had much Pinhook products before? Always chuck it in the chat. But essentially, Pinhook is right from the start. They have been very clear that they are a non-distilling producer. So there's quite a few of those in the States now, but Pinhook kind of probably got their start a lot earlier than a lot of other non-distilling producers. But right from the start, Pinhook said, we're not going to be the kind of bourbon company that distills whiskey. We're going to be the kind of bourbon company that actually buys whiskey, whether it's young, old, however it is. See if it's not ready yet, we'll age it, we'll keep it running, and then when it's ready, we'll release it. So that's the format of a non-distilling producer, which is not new. But what Pinhook does do is they bring a really, really unique way of thinking about whiskey and a way of thinking about bourbon to the whiskey world. So if you're ever wondering about what the name is, Pinhook. Pinhook is a term in the horse racing world. Obviously, there's a few things that Kentucky is really well known for. Kentucky is really well known for whiskey, but it's also very, very well known for horse racing and what they call horse farms. When we were in Lexington, we went to Kentucky recently. Actually, we got a chance to visit the operations where Pinhook is based. And it's right in the middle of horse farm country. So they really, really love their horse racing out there. There's a big track called Keeneland. And pretty much horse racing and whiskey go together hand in hand. But pinhooking is a particular practice when it comes to whiskey, it comes to horse racing, where basically you take a young foal, a young horse, you purchase it because you know its lineage, you know it's coming from a good line. You buy that before it's mature. You kind of raise it. You raise it for at least a year. and then you sell it on when it's a thoroughbred, when it's basically ready to start racing, when it's mature. And they thought that that was a really, really neat way of thinking about being a non-distilling producer. You're taking product, you're buying it from a reliable source, from somewhere that you think is pretty amazing. It might not be ready yet. You wait until the right time, and then you release it later. And so basically, that's the story of what the name is for Pinhook. So we're tasting here their core range bourbon. This is actually the 2024 release. There's a new one that's kind of almost sold out, I think, on their website now. But we're tasting the 2024 release. So if you've ever seen the Pinhook labels, you'll always notice that there's at least one big, very obvious part of the label, which is the horses. And every year they assign a different thoroughbred. It's a real thoroughbred. So that's a painting or a kind of a drawing of a particular thoroughbred that is assigned to Pinhook for that year. They actually have one of their partners owns a stable. I think it's called Bourbon something stable. And basically every year they choose one horse, which is showing a lot of promise, and they name it after something kind of something in the line of a bourbon kind of inspiration. And they take another horse and they name it in line of a rye. So the core range for each year is going to be kind of a new horse from this stable. So we're tasting here bourbon whiskey. This is a custom mash bill. So they might not have started out kind of with any kind of idea that they were going to be making whiskey. They just actually started purchasing. They're well known for purchasing from MGP back in the day. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But quite early on, they started a partnership with a really awesome distillery, which is based in very old, serious heritage distillery in Kentucky. So that's called the Old Taylor Distillery. And now that is the site of what's called Castle and Key. So this is distilled at that distillery. It's probably about 4 or 5 years old. And it is a custom mash bill of 75% corn, 10% rye, and 15% malted barley. So please do chuck in your tasting notes in the chat as they're coming in. Rob says, not sure drinking bourbon and the trots are two things you want to associate with each other. All right.
So obviously there's an affiliation with the Kentucky Derby, which a lot of bourbon, I guess, brands, distilleries do, yearly releases for as well. So they just take it one step further, and it's just horse related entirely, right?
Yeah, so a lot of distilleries do commemorative editions. For a particular special release, they'll say, we're going to highlight a horse which is very famous. And Pinhook, it takes a slightly different route, which is they say, these horses could be famous. These horses, they're young, they're kind of up and coming, and they're all kind of on the circuit. But at the same time, they're not famous yet. Maybe someday they will be famous, and maybe these bottles will be even worth more then. Okay, I can see some good tasting notes. We've got caramel, baking spice, sweet brown sugar, vanilla. Yeah, more caramel, more leather. This is really good. So that's exactly what the distillery is trying to do for them here. Basically, Sean Josephs, who's the founder, he said that he came up with this mash bill because he wanted to have a little bit more softness, a little bit more of the classic sweetness, kind of butterscotch notes that you're getting out of reasonably high corn. But the same with his rye that's being produced at Castle and Key and the bourbon is that they have quite a high percentage of malted barley. So yeah, this is 15% malted barley. It's not an unusual thing, but at the same time, it's quite high compared to most mash bills. What's really weird is the rye whiskey mash bill is actually 20% barley. So 60% rye, 20% barley, and 20% corn. And I think Sean's kind of thing is he says that, we think of barley as being, a non-flavoring grain. It doesn't bring a lot of product, a lot of characteristic to bourbons. He's got two theories in that. One is that no one really kind of does high barley stuff, so we don't really get to taste the characteristic of that barley. And obviously there's single malts from all around the world which have a lot of characteristics, so it's not like they don't have any flavor at all. But his thing is that barley, at the end of the day, is one of the most expensive parts of the mash bill. So there's a good reason why a lot of distillers don't use high barley in their mash bills.
Scott, do we know what their yearly sort of production volumes are?
No, actually, because they're only contract distilling out of Castle and Key. They don't have their own operations necessarily. So whatever they get out of a particular run from Castle and Key is probably, yeah, enough for them. They do seem to sell out quite fast. So I'm not sure if that's a product of just being very popular or not having huge stocks. But all their product is stored at the Castle and Key distillery. So when we visited, because we're not going to hide too many things from you guys, but there are 2 single barrel whiskies coming through us and Whisky Hunt Australia. Hopefully, at the end of the year, we'll see at least one of them. Maybe potentially early next year if we have to. But we went to Castle and Key Distillery to pick 2 bourbons. One of them was a 5-year bourbon, and it would be quite similar in age and flavor profile to this kind of thing. Actually, probably very close to the third whiskey we're going to taste, which is the Cask Strength 5-year-old. And we picked a 10-year-old as well at that time. So we did get to visit the operations. We got to see Castle and Key, the way they produce, and we also got to see the rickhouse. That rickhouse has the title of saying it is the longest rickhouse in the world, or the longest warehouse, potentially for aging, primarily for aging whiskey. I'm not sure of the exact classification, but they say it's 200 yards long, which is essentially like 4 Olympic swimming pools length. It's essentially like a AFL football stadium length. It is crazy. We went in there, 4.5 stories tall. Each story has about 3 barrels high. And you stand in the middle, you look all the way down the end, and it's obviously lit by these kind of small white kind of dim lights. And we walked all the way from one end to the other, and it just took ages. But it was very cool. It was built, that rickhouse was built in like the late 1800s, like I think 1887 or something like that, back when Colonel Taylor started the Old Taylor Distillery. So the Old Taylor Distillery, Colonel Taylor, quite a famous name in the whiskey world, I believe. I don't have any reason not to believe, and I'm pretty sure it is the Colonel Taylor who obviously is commemorated now on the E.H. Taylor for a Buffalo Trace product. And he's obviously a very famous person in the American whiskey industry because he kind of was a big part of passing the Bottle in Bond Act, which is why he's kind of commemorated on the E.H. Taylor bottlings and why E.H. Taylor is a bonded. But the Old Taylor Distillery got started essentially because it's right on the banks of the river. There's a river that runs right alongside it. We were there in some historic rain. I'm not sure if you saw some of the footage of Buffalo Trace when Buffalo Trace was flooded a little earlier this year. We were there almost the exact same time as that. So the river was raging. I can tell you that. But what he did was he built a well. He built a well on that property, which is in the shape of a keyhole. And that's one of the reasons why the place is called Castle and Key now, because the key is the well, and the very old building essentially the old distillery essentially looks like a castle. So the Castle and Key Distillery is the kind of the recreated, the rebirthed Old Taylor Distillery, and the gift shops even in one of the old boiler rooms. So it's this huge cavernous kind of room with cast iron and brick. It's pretty special place to get to.
Scott, I've got some of the photos or some of the quick footages from your trip. Do you mind if I share whilst people pour their second dram?
Please do. Yeah, so if you want to go out of this into the straight rye, feel free.
Is
Straight
that
into the
coming up?
Google Drive.
Is that, yeah, is that showing up?
Yep.
So trying to, I think this one shows just how long the
Yeah.
rickhouse is.
Yeah, you can see it. It's almost impossible to catch on film.
It's still going. And that's the castle building, yeah?
Yeah, that's the castle. So this is right in the bottom of the valley, right near the Woodford Reserve Distillery, actually. So we came straight from there, kind of in between Woodford Reserve and Buffalo Trace. So in that same kind of area, kind of near Lexington in Kentucky.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
All right, so let's get into whiskey number 2. This is the Straight Rye. So we're going into, and I'll show you the rye bottle just so you know. Of course, as everyone knows, rye has to be green. That's the rules of American whiskey. Rye labels are green. There's no. I think I tried to figure out where that started, and I think it might have been Beam or somebody in the early 2000s started doing green labels on rye. But I always get amused when I see a new rye into the market. It's like, of course it's green. So this is another product that is kind of a core range for these guys. This is, I believe, 49.5% ABV. The bourbon that we tasted was 49% ABV. So, obviously that's part of the reason we're getting such a great mouthfeel out of both of these. They're not 80 proof. They're not kind of just flat. And this is another product that is the custom mash bill from Castle and Key. So this is distillate from Castle and Key, and probably about 3 to 4 years old. Hmm.
Always in the back of my mind when we're trying a rye now is Emma's main tasting note. Is it a marshmallow or is it pickles?
Does she apply that to rye, or is it just to bourbon? Or is it's all American whiskey?
I think all American whiskey, but yeah.
It's definitely fresh and herbal. Yeah, my feeling is that the barley is kind of giving a lot of softness compared to a harsh kind of Indiana style rye, which you might expect.
It drinks lighter than the first one we just had, even though the ABVs are pretty similar, around 49.5.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, for a young rye, I'd say it's really quite clean. It's really quite smooth. I was really impressed with the Castle and Key distillate that we tried while we were there. We got a chance to try a few things out of the barrel. And honestly, their own products, I think, don't taste as good as the stuff that's coming out of the Pinhook range, which is a little bit crazy that that they started this relationship with these guys right from the start. So Castle and Key started, really very quite recently. It's a very new brand. I think even the product that they have aging in the warehouse right now, don't think they have anything really older than 5 or 6 years old. So to taste equally good stuff, if not, depends on what you get your hands on, potentially even better stuff coming out of a bottler, a non-distilling producer from that distillery is really cool. The way that Sean tells the story, essentially, it's they had the connection through the stable. That basically they basically knew the guys who were opening the distillery, and the distillery needed extra cash, so they started doing this contract distilling business. So right from the very start, Pinhook was involved in buying barrels from those guys, which is very cool. Yeah, there was a question in the chat saying about do they have their own rickhouse or their own area at Castle and Key? No, I don't believe so. I think a lot of it is mixed in with the regular stuff, and I'm sure it's a bit of a nightmare to try and find it. There wasn't necessarily like a Pinhook only area, and a big thing that Pinhook loves is they love variability. So it would be a big shame for them to only kind of store their product in a section of the warehouse or section of the rick house, right at the bottom or right at the top or kind of only on one level. Because a big part about what they love about whiskey is the variability. And we're going to kind of go into that a lot with, yeah, there you go. We're going to go into that a lot with the vertical series, but I believe it was kind of probably most of their stuff is mixed all the way through. And you would think that would be chaotic, but distilleries get pretty good at tracking their barrels. I
Which
always
is
get amused when a company says, "Oh, we lost this barrel down the back of the rick house, and then we found it, and we thought it was amazing." I'm always quite amused by that story.
it's a beautiful romance to that story. But as you can see on the photo here, all the Pinhook barrels are marked with their logo on it. So it's pretty, even though it does say Castle and Key on it, it's pretty obvious when you're walking down I imagine the rick house to spot a Pinhook barrel versus their own.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. So there will be some barrels in there that are not Castle and Key distillate because I believe they're storing their other stuff there as well, which is primarily MGP. MGP being Indiana, MGP being Midwest Grain Products. They purchased bourbon and rye from them back at the start. So we'll be tasting a little bit of MGP later on. That's the 9-year-old bourbon and the 8-year-old rye. Those are both going to be MGP products. Aroma from the rye, damp basement. I like that note. I really like that note. Mint, grass, fresh cut grass, white pepper. Yeah, I often get a white pepper on a rye. Grassy in a good way. Appreciate that, Gary. So that variability, a big reason why Pinhook got started was because they felt like there was a huge lack of transparency in the industry of non-distilling producers, and we see a lot more transparency the past 3-4 years than we have in any time before then. I remember back when I was working at an American whiskey bar in Sydney called NOLA. At that time, there was a class action going against a company called Templeton. And basically, the class action stated that you made it sound like you were making this whiskey. You made it sound like you were distilling it. And just then it comes out later that you only bottled it, you purchased it from someone else. And there was this huge class action, and it was a successful suit. And a lot of claimants kind of claimed, the cost of however many bottles they purchased. And Templeton got a big slap on the wrist. But at the same time, we also saw a big change in that the TTB or the liquor kind of licensing board in America started making sure that companies actually had to start putting on the label the state that it was distilled in. So if you were bottling in New Orleans, you had to say this was distilled in Indiana or this was distilled in Kentucky or something like that. So it became a little bit harder to hide all the different things that you were trying to do with your non-distilling producer. But that was the norm back in kind of the mid 2010s, and even not that long ago, people would just be very happy to not give any clues where anything was coming from. It was all this kind of very romantic story. And I love a romantic story as much as anybody else, but the whole whiskey industry kind of got sick of a lack of transparency. And Pinhook very much from the start said, transparency is cool, transparency is fun, and transparency actually tells you a lot about the way that whiskey came out the way that it did, the flavor profiles that are coming out. And as we move into the core cask strength bourbon, so this is the 5-year-old cask strength. I'll tell you a little bit about I think the best way to understand Pinhook, because I didn't really get it for a little while. They've got some kind of crazy ways that they think about whiskey, which is, I think it's actually easier, and they would probably describe it like this too. It's easier to think about Pinhook like a wine brand than it is to think of them like a whiskey brand. And by that I mean that their releases aren't intended to be the same year in, year out. So a big reason they make that very clear on the label about, this is a year, this is a different horse, this is essentially a different vintage. So if you're thinking about wines, when you're purchasing wines, you're purchasing, the 2023 vintage or the 2019 vintage or the 2017 vintage. And people will say to you, oh, have you had this vintage of this wine? And that was a particularly amazing year for that winery. And people just, assume that doesn't necessarily apply to whiskey. People think that kind of whiskey is an industrial product and it's going to taste the same year in, year out. It doesn't really vary very much. And this is kind of a bit of an argument that's been happening in the whiskey industry for a little while is there such a thing as, terroir, which is a very kind of whiny, wanky term for basically being able to taste the place of where that whiskey was made. And is there such a thing as terroir in whiskey? And there's a few brands that we've worked with in the past who are very strong on one side, and there's a few brands that we work with that probably would fall on the other. And I think it's not too hard to make the argument that there are a huge number of different factors that will affect the way that a whiskey ages, the way that a whiskey is produced. It could be that you have a certain number of years that are warmer than others. You can have a certain number of years that are drier, even different kind of barometric pressure of a place, or I think even Sean has said that he thinks that there's variability in the spirit that comes off of the stills based on the minerality of the water that is being used in the fermentation. So if, seasonally, potentially you could have changes in the minerality of the water, which comes through the distillate, which comes into the bourbon. Some people would say, no, I don't believe that variability exists. But I think definitely you can make a very strong argument that at least on the maturation side, there's a huge amount of variability from the years. And there's a huge amount of variability barrel to barrel. So obviously we all love single barrel products. We love single barrel releases. Obviously that's the reason we went to Kentucky to go and do lots of single barrel picks. But it's not hard to imagine that barrel to barrel, there's going to be a lot of variation in flavors. And Pinhook started out essentially saying, we're going to embrace the idea that our releases are not going to be the same year in, year out. We're not going to try and blend to have the same flavor profile for our core range. Even the core range is going to change. So, a Buffalo Trace, Wild Turkey, they have entire blending teams fully built on the idea that they need to have their consistent product. They need to have a flavor profile that comes through the same year in, year out. And a person can go and purchase a bottle today, and they can crack a bottle that they opened that they had 4 years ago, and it should theoretically be the same flavor. Pinhook essentially said, number one, we don't have the scale to do that. We don't have the team and the ability to blend hundreds and hundreds of barrels together, which is what you need. You need huge batches of product to get that same kind of consistency. They don't have the ability to do that. So let's embrace the fact that this is going to taste a little bit different year in, year out. So essentially they're creating these vintages of bourbon as they go. And the idea is that, if you like this vintage, buy a few, because it may not be coming back the exact same kind of flavor profile.
So Scott, you just mentioned obviously the big guys, your Jack Daniels, your Jim Beams, your Buffalo Trace, even on the Scotch side of things, your Johnny Walkers, your Shivers, they need that consistency. They've designed their industrial machine for it. And, whilst there is flavour coming in time and place, one thing that's very evident is just when you walk into one of these big rick houses, the temperature difference versus really high up to the ground floor could be, it's like 5 to 10 degrees sometimes even more in summer. Like that has to have an effect in how much the sugars are interacting with the wood and everything like that. And that in itself, is and that rick house could be different to the rick house next door or down the road or in a valley. That is, the differences, I guess, that you could call the vintages versus a wine field that's on the north side with the morning dew sun and on the western rains coming through on a different hill and that sort of stuff. I guess that to me, where the vintage is the rick house temperature difference and the pressures, it's probably the biggest like variable that at least one when you go to these distilleries you immediately can see. That doesn't matter if you care about the science or not. That is very evident when, at least to me, when I visited one.
Yeah, for sure. It's a variation you can literally feel, like the temperature that you're talking about, and yeah, humidity versus dryness. And even theoretically, I think there's some rick houses where if you go up into the higher levels, you have to start wearing, like a little meter on you to stop the fact that you might be consuming too much alcohol because just it's inside the air, whereas down the bottom, it's a lot more kind of cool and yeah, it's a very different environment across the rickhouse. And so obviously larger brands will take a cross section. There's this kind of perception in consumers' minds, I think, that brands move barrels. I think the only brand that really does any moving of their barrels to ensure consistency is Maker's Mark. Nobody else bothers because it's way too much work. They will take a cross section. They'll take some from the top, some from the bottom, some from the middle, and essentially they'll create a blend of flavor profile of hundreds of barrels to try and overcome that inconsistency. And Pinhook comes against a lot of people who get frustrated by that because they go, "Hey, I just bought, this release from you. It was absolutely incredible. And then you're telling me next year I won't be able to buy the same thing and I won't be able to get it back." And they say, yeah, sorry, you either missed the boat or you gotta you gotta pay attention to the auction sites. Because at the end of the day, there is, even in the big boys, there is flavor drift. You taste a product from 1 year and then you taste that same product maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago and you go, hey, there's like a huge amount of flavor difference over these larger timescales. And even over shorter timescales, there's occasionally batches that taste a little bit different, a little bit better, or a little bit worse potentially. So I think the idea that there's consistency in the whiskey world is very much a constructed one. Um, Variability is kind of pretty natural when it comes to whiskey.
And the big guys with their marketing engines, I remember, is it the Devil's Cup from Jim Beam, which talks about the X and the Angel's Share and everything, but there's a Devil's Share now, and it goes a little bit too much in the world of marketing. But like I get it, they got to sell to the masses and tell the story a little bit differently because it's just fermented corn at the end of the day, right?
That's actually my favorite marketing part of the American whiskey. I think that's my favorite marketing moment that I've seen in American whiskey, is the difference between the Angel's Share and the Devil's Cut. And for a long time, I thought they were just the name for the same thing, different names for the same thing. Um, and I recently learned when I was in Kentucky, I said, "What's this? What's this about the Devil's Cut?" Because I actually, I'm a metalhead. I'm a rock dude. I like the idea of the Devil's Cut, in whiskey. And they said, "Oh no, no, no! The Angel Share. That's the whiskey that's the alcohol that leaves the barrel, and the Devil's Cut is the whiskey that remains inside the wood when you dump." And I was like, oh, okay, that actually makes sense. And I think I even heard Sean say, I got it written down here somewhere. he says that if you're bottling your whiskey in the winter, so when the barrels are cold, when the fibers are more closed, when they squeeze more liquid and whiskey back into the barrel, there's bottles, 750 ml more bottles inside that barrel than there would be in the summer, because the wood soaks up 6 full bottles per cask in the summer. So that's the devil's cut. There is a real amount of whiskey that's inside those barrels, which is crazy when you think about it. They're not that big, you know, they're like 200 liters, full size barrel, American bourbon barrel. But to have 6 full 750 ml bottles inside the wood at any one time, particularly in summer, that's kind of crazy. So yeah, it may be marketing, but that's my favorite bit of marketing. I'm seeing heaps and heaps of love for this one, for the 5-year-old cask strength. We didn't even talk about the proof. Yeah, you're right. Thanks, Simon. I should have given you a warning. 59.55% ABV. Huge. But I can happily report that the single barrel that we picked, the 5-year-old single barrel, is quite close in flavor profile to that from memory. So a little bit of freshness. It's kind of obviously got some sweetness there, but it's really light. It's like almost peachy to me. It's lovely.
God gave
Alrighty.
me the samples when he got back for me to try, and I consumed them all, and they were delicious. And it does remind me of this one. So yeah, I'm very excited for it.
I said to him, I was like, Ollie, can you please, let me know if I picked a good one or or if I picked a stinker? And he didn't respond. And then just tonight he said, oh yeah, like I don't have those bottles anymore. It's like, okay, they must have been all right.
If it's bad, I would have told you immediately. If you don't hear from me, then assume all is well, right?
Yeah. No, we were pretty confident. We were there with myself, Brock, and Andrew joined us on that one. That was kind of the whiskey hunt little tour that we did there. And we picked probably, I think, 7 or 6 single barrels across the trip. So they'll all be coming out over the next little while. All right, so we're going to move in from the Castle and Key product, and now we're going into the MGP part of the tasting, the Indiana part of the tasting, which is always pretty exciting to me. Like I said, there was some, people got upset because a lot of brands didn't disclose where they were getting their stuff from. It didn't necessarily mean that they didn't like where the product was being made, or the product itself wasn't good. They just disliked the lack of transparency. But ever since there's been slightly more transparency, and ever since everyone started realizing that, these contract distillers know what they're doing, these contract distillers are making some pretty good stuff. There's been a real rebirth and kind of rehabilitation in the reputation of this particular distillery, MGP. And that's a bucket list item for me. I didn't get a chance to go visit MGP in Indiana. It's not too far from Kentucky. It's just the next state up. But they've been making whiskey for a very long time. Used to be the Seagram's plant, and they've been contract distilling for quite some time as well. But obviously not many brands talked about where that whiskey was coming from until recently. So we're going to taste the Vertical Series 9-year-old bourbon, and we're going to try essentially side by side. We might as well do them side by side. The 9-year-old's bourbon single barrel, because these are both coming from the same batch. This is where things get pretty exciting, in my opinion, with the way that Pinhook are doing this Vertical Series. So when I said that I didn't really get what they were doing, this was what I meant by I didn't really get it. The Vertical Series is inspired directly from the world of wine. You do a vertical tasting of wine, and you're tasting the 2017 vintage, then the 2018, 19, 20, 21. For example, you're tasting back to back to back, year after year after year, to try and taste the variability in this year's produce versus next year's. Maybe the rain levels were different. Maybe the climate had a different summer, different kind of winter. And that kind of variability shows up all the time in wine, and people are very, well versed in variability of wines. But what Pinhook said, it's like we can do that with whiskey too, but it's not about different years of production. It's about the same parcel of barrels, the same amount of barrels that were originally purchased from MGP. We're just going to release some at 5 years, and then 6, and then 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 12. So the vertical series from Pinhook started at 5 years old and has been going now for, I think, 6 years. Well, this is the 9-year-old, and they're going to go all the way up to 12. But that parcel of barrels, I think it's 1,300. It's not that many barrels at the end of the day. 1,350 MGP barrels. And they've been releasing them from 4 years, to 12. So every year they release about 50 to 100 different barrels. And as they go, we're going to be able to taste this exact same crop of MGP barrels at different age statements. And you get to have this discussion around, was the 8-year better than the 9? And why was that? What flavors came out just from age compared to all the other variations in flavor profiles? All right, so now this is the 9-year-old bourbon. So this is a batch, that 1,350 barrels of MGP product. And I believe it's a custom mash bill because it is 70% or 75% corn, 20.5% rye, and 4.5% barley. So that's a slightly unusual mash bill for MGP. They usually only do 75, 21, 4. But I imagine this is a special batch. In particular, what was crazy about these barrels is that they only bought them for $465 US at the time. So 100 per barrel, I mean. So $465 per barrel. Obviously, you times that by 1,350. It's not a tiny amount of money, but you compare that to a barrel of similar age product, we're talking probably about $2.5 to $3 US dollars now. The market has significantly changed from when these guys purchased these barrels, 6, 7 years ago. They bought them when they were 3, and then obviously they did their first release once they hit that 4-year-old age statement. And I believe they were paying, I think, $1 per barrel per year in storage fees as well, which is probably something like $50 at minimum per barrel per year if you're doing storage in a pretty normal kind of rick house these days. So the bourbon industry back then was really nothing like where it is today. We're at a huge influx of the demand for American whiskey, particularly kind of craft decent stuff is very, very popular at the moment. Obviously, brands like Buffalo Trace helped a lot with Pappy Van Winkle's and your antique collections. But the broader bourbon market has grown a lot. I think the highest that the bourbon market has ever had as far as consumption in the States was 1979. That was when the peak amount of consumption for American whiskey in the States was, and we're only 2/3 the way to that peak now. So we might feel like things are crazy, but they can get more crazy. They can always get more crazy. So back when they started, they purchased these barrels of MGP, and they started aging them. They started figuring out what they were going to do with them. So let's check it out. Any tasting notes?
God, I was going to say, the first thing for me when, and you can always taste it when it's sort of an MGP, is sort of this high rye bourbon. It's a lot more cleaner, it's smoother, it's more defined for me.
Yeah, I find the MGP bourbons have like a soft, almost like a dustiness for my palate, of the way that I kind of experience these MGP bourbons. It's just a sugar bomb, isn't it? Like there's so much flavor, so much sweetness, great amount of kind of barrel flavor, obviously, like tannins coming through there. I think Sean pretty much you'll see the proofs change year in, year out from these vertical releases. And I think broadly he said that he's kind of been bumping the proof up slowly as it gets older and older. And he says it's kind of to help counteract the tannin of the wood. Is a little bit more proof potentially helps out with counteracting sweetness and tannins. All right, well, we might as well do a side by side. Smell that compared to the single barrel. So from what I believe is we have a single barrel coming, which is going to be, by the time that it gets bottled, I believe it'll be a 10-year-old. So it'll be a 10-year-old from the exact same batch. So our single barrel from that original 1350 barrels, just 1 year older than what we're tasting here. Hopefully you guys can pick up some kind of variability. Oh yeah. I believe this was selected for seal bucks. Is that correct, Ollie?
Yes, this one, yeah, we grabbed from an online retailer in the States.
This is super earthy to me. It's not got the same level of sweetness, I don't think. Michael says both very tasty. Yeah, yeah. Fraser says leather on the single barrel, but you don't get that on the standard. I get like a deep plum kind of sweetness on the nose, like a fruit note on the regular. And then on the single barrel, seems a lot more dry. So that's part of the fun of picking single barrels, obviously. I believe when you've got a batch of, let's say, 50 casks, which I think this probably is, 50 to 100 casks for the regular vertical release. I believe Sean essentially will pick a number of barrels from a huge amount of barrels. He'll create a few blends of, say, 5 different barrels, and he'll kind of then use those blends of barrels to make a master blend of each of those as 4 different ingredients, for example. So what you do is you kind of create this flavor profile out of a number of different casks, and then you play with that flavor profile, because at the end of the day, it would be impossible to kind of say, all right, we need 1.5% of this barrel and we need 0.5% of this barrel. When you're doing a batch, even only 50 barrels at a time, it starts to get absolutely way too complex too fast. So I think that's a little bit of the cheat way of it's not cheating, it's just simplifying to a certain degree, so you can then use those as a flavor palette to bring together into a blend. And a blend should really have a huge, it should be able to hit lots of different structural elements. It should be able to have sweetness. It should have a fruit and tannin and oak and kind of body and finish. Whereas a single barrel, you don't really need to be worried so much about that. You just like to have a particular characteristic that is pleasing on its own.
I'm just going to share the tasting notes I've grabbed online for this release. Slightly different mash bill, apparently. 75 corn, 20.5 rye, and 4.5 malted barley for this one.
No, that's the same mash bill as
Oh,
the
yeah.
vertical.
Okay.
So is that the tasting notes for the single barrel or for the blend?
For the single barrel, I think. Yep.
Okay,
If I'm
so
reading this source right.
marzipan, stone fruit, baking spices, fresh wood on the nose. I can get marzipan for sure. Baking spices, yeah. Toffee, tobacco, chocolate, berry jam, and light citrus on the palate. Marzipan. Did Fred Minnick write this review? Patrick.
No, he didn't. I did not go. It's someone called Trace.
Marzipan. Yeah, look, as soon as you say it though, you're gonna start smelling it. So I can't disagree. Hmm.
The plums, the stone fruits that you mentioned before, that's all I'm getting on the nose. Like it's just and the baking spice that
Mm.
Fraser said. I think, yep,
Yeah,
it's
baking
definitely
spice.
there. Quick hands. Actually, no, I'll put it in the poll at the end. We want to vote which separately to voting for your top two drams. I'll put the side by side of these two whiskeys so you can deliberately vote which one of these two you prefer because I'm curious.
Yeah, and this is what I mean with the blend, but also the single barrel, obviously. Single barrels very clearly, once it's gone, it's gone. But this blend is essentially that's it. If you love it, if you absolutely love it, it's time to grab it right now. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be waiting around because they're in high demand and this particular batch is never coming back. And I think particularly with the way that things are going right now with the cost of whiskey, it might be the case that prices in whiskey will go down because demand has gone down somewhat recently. There's a lot softening of demand, people not having as much cash in their pockets. So it's possible we'll see, prices of casks like MGP going down. But these barrels necessarily, I don't think that Castle and Key are necessarily buying more MGP barrels at any one time. I think they're just holding onto this particular batch that they have. So once these MGP barrels are gone, once that 12 years of different vertical releases is up, I think that's exactly all we're going to get out of Pinhook from this particular batch. So if you like this one, don't don't try and hesitate too far. All right, let's get into it. Final whiskey of the night, the Vertical Series 8-year-old single barrel rye. Looking forward to this. Old NGP rye, the 8-year in particular, has amazing reviews. I've seen people saying online that the 9-year-old, which is the most recent one, which just landed in the States, is good, but the 8-year-old apparently was spectacular. So let's get into it. That's the one there. Oh no, that's the seal barks. I haven't got the rye. Damn it. I will pull these up though from the previous one where you guys are nosing the rye. That was the Vertical Series blend. And that one there was the Sealbuck single barrel. And you'll notice that there's these interesting shapes on all the different bottles. Some of them are a little bit more visible than others. Those shapes are different kind of jockey colors and jockey shapes. I'm finding all the same one now. There you go. There's another one. So all different shapes for the jockeys' colors.
Scott, is it worth a quick mention what Brock and the Whiskey Hunt team are doing in terms of barrel picking for Australia?
You mean what's coming around the corner, or what the whole thing is?
Oh, I guess some of these regular faces you guys will know. There's a few new faces as well. So the quick gist of it is it's very popular in the States because of how liquor laws are based not just local states but also county. There's no online ordering from New York and shipping it to Kentucky or California. It's quite convoluted and complicated. And we're quite lucky here in a sense. But a way around it is a lot of local bottle shops, a lot of retailers, they have a bit of point of difference is they'll just buy a cask of whiskey for themselves and they'll slap their bottle shop label on it and they'll call it a barrel pick. And it's very, very popular in the States. And something that Brock from Whiskey Hunt Australia that we partner with, he's sort of helps us bring in a lot of this good American stuff. He's brought that concept to Australia about 6-7 years ago, and we do all the logistics for Whiskey Hunt. He does all the sort of barrel picking. He's brought Scott Allan as well for some of the stuff. Chris went last year as well, so we're getting more and more involved in that side of things. But yeah, the long story short is Brock has all these amazing relationships with these great American distilleries, and you will knock on their door and he goes, I want to buy just a single barrel of whiskey, but exclusively for Australia. He'll ship it over and then we'll bottle it and launch it to you guys, either through Whiskey Hunt Australia or the Whiskey List as well. So he will sell to a bunch of partner retailers across, one in each state. Brock is sort of set up as well to get access to it. So it's very much the democracy of sharing these single barrel picks, where it used to be for one retailer in one county in one state. He's doing it for all of Australia and sharing it that way. So I love that story and what Brock has brought to the table. And the fact each time, it's not just Brock doing it. He always brings a bunch of people. It's his palate is his palate, but he knows that not everyone's palate is the same. So having multiple people pick and choose these barrels and to validate that it's awesome. It's just a really cool story. And yeah, Brock's, I've seen the lineup for the rest of the year, and there are some very cool things happening. So apart from the pinhooks that Scott's just mentioned, Scott picked a bunch of other barrels with Brock on their latest trip. So there's some very cool things coming. Some of the only American distilleries that will be released as a single barrel pick in Australia will only come through Whiskey Hunts as well. So there's definitely worth reaching out to Brock and subscribing to his list as well if you haven't.
Yeah, 100%. And I like what you said about, he brings along people to be involved with the tastings. Sometimes we'll get samples here in Australia and we get to do barrel picks, here in Australia. Obviously, it's not something we can make available to a lot of people, but we will keep doing these American whiskey tours where we're going to go over and keep picking single barrels. Some stores are well known for being, they're great at doing barrel picks. Some particular people, there's a guy, his barrel picks are absolutely legendary, Joe C. So barrel picks in the States are very much tied to the personalities, the people who do the picks. And at the end of the day, Brock is leading, and Brock's always going to make sure that we don't pick a stinker. But he does involve and let other people kind of say their views. And on the trip when we were doing barrel picks, he's saying, look, I've got my favorite, but I'm willing to hear arguments about what you guys think, what you guys reckon it should be. And there were some pretty, not, I'm going to say heated, but there were passionate arguments about choosing which barrel in which place. So yeah, it's very exciting to go and do these barrel picks, but it's also very exciting to share them with you guys as well. We're very lucky in Australia. In a way, we don't get access to the full range of American whiskies that most more populous states get access to. So on some level, we don't get the huge range the States do, just because it's too hard to bring all the different varieties over. But we do get access to bottles which Americans can only dream of. Sometimes people get excited about the idea of, an Eagle Rare is going to be a distillery exclusive. And I'm thinking, oh, is it a special variation on the Eagle Rare? And oh, no, it's just the regular Eagle Rare. So if you can get down to the distillery today, you can buy a bottle. And I'm thinking, wow, like we're so lucky in Australia, we can just get access to huge numbers of products, which they wouldn't they wouldn't be able to get on every shelf any time of the week. So we're very lucky in Australia to get that access to those bottles, and very lucky to get access to these barrel picks as well. We did a barrel pick at Buffalo Trace, and some people who are, they're pretty serious in the American whiskey industry over there. We met them, and they're like, "You're going to Buffalo Trace to do a barrel pick?" And we're like, "Oh yeah, yeah. I think we're going to have Freddie Johnson, the kind of the main tour guy who runs the entire tour program. We think he's going to take us around. You're going to have Freddie Johnson take you around?" And I'm like, "You want to come?" They're like, "Yes." So we're very lucky in Australia in some ways to get access to what we do. So we're very much looking forward to sharing that with you guys. So
This 8-year-old is so good. I never even tried it yet, Scott. There's a
the
few
nose
comments
blew me
coming in.
away.
I need to check if we have any more stock. I'll share the link shortly to whatever we do have left. But yeah, I knew this 8-year-old was going to be popular, but first time me trying it as well. It's very good.
I honestly did a double take when I put my nose in it for the first time. MGP rye, this is a 95.5, so 95% rye, 5% barley. Is really well known for herbaceous, minty kind of qualities. A little bit more heavy. I wouldn't say bitter, but definitely herbal. Darker, kind of richer rye flavor profile. So interested to see if you guys think that's what it comes out. It's definitely got a lot of body. Does have that spice. But it's definitely not over tannin. It's quite light in color when you really look at it. For an 8-year-old. The environment at Castle and Key is, it's probably quite a gentle environment for aging. When I was there, it was quite cold. We were there in April, but it was very, very kind of humid and cool there in the bottom of the valley. I wouldn't be surprised if we're pulling out some pretty cool kind of variation in flavor profile between something that's aging here at Castle and Key compared to aging in Indiana, fully in Indiana, being purchased as like a 8-year-old MGP product straight out of the barrel.
Scott's being a bit humble. He was hiding in his bathtub because there's tornado warnings and the sirens going off.
You had to bring that up again. I swear we did this in the last virtual tasting.
As your employer, that is a moment to shit bricks when you send people overseas on a tour and there's tornado warnings and evacuations, and then Buffalo Trace floods the week after that you guys are there, and it's just, yeah, it's not a stress. It's too light of a word sometimes, but I'm glad you guys had fun and survived it all. It's just crazy time of the year.
Yeah, we might not do the next US tour in tornado season, but who knows? Awesome. Yeah, guys. I mean, I think that really kind of sums up really well that flavor profile of what we're going to get out of Pinhook. It's a huge variation in flavors from the core range, that kind of really light, fresh flavor profile. Obviously, it's a little bit younger. I'm assuming the core range in the future is going to kind of slowly eke out, probably from 5 years to maybe up to 6. But at the end of the day, Pinhook really doesn't want their core range to be too expensive. So we're tasting fresh, light flavor profiles in the younger products, and we're tasting these heavy, kind of like really deep, rich sweetness, kind of some herbal notes in there, particularly on the Ryes. Do you want to put up the poll there, Ollie? See what people thought was their favorite?
Yeah, sure. At the
So you
same
can vote
time,
for 2 whiskies.
Yeah, two. Vote for your top two. It's multiple choice. The first question, and then I've added in a bonus question, which is that the side by side of those two bourbons. Just curious to see how whiskey 4 and 5 compared. Yeah, I've checked. We don't have. We're showing up -1 for the 8-year-old. I will put in a request to see if there's any more you can get from the States, but I have a feeling the last bottle was used for this virtual tasting.
We'll always chase something down for you guys. If you send us a message, send us an email, we'll try and find something for you if you really, really want it. Obviously, that's another plug for TWL Rewards. If you become a rewards member, Chris is your personal bottle hunter. So we'll make something happen if it means the world to you.
Yeah, on top of that, you get first access to everything that we bring in through TWL Rewards and 10% off our core range, which these guys will get you. Reward members automatically added to your cart, so plus free shipping points, all the other cool perks. We should do a giveaway to Kentucky next year as well. I'm thinking, Scott.
I'll be there if you tell me.
Yeah.
All right. The poll is done. You want to share that result?
Sure.
Alrighty. Wow. There wasn't a huge amount of chat around that rye, so I didn't think it was going to be a favorite, but it's definitely number one. Then the cask strength 5-year-old. That's good news for us, Ollie, because our single barrel is going to be quite similar flavor profile to that. And then the 9-year-old single barrel bourbon. Yeah, that was amazing. So I'm assuming that means that the second question, the single barrel, won out.
Yeah, it did if you scroll down. I don't know if it's. I've scrolled down at least on my screen. How it works on everyone's Zooms. You can see the results. So only one vote for whiskey number 4 versus
Wow.
almost majority for whiskey number 5. So definitely the favorite out of those two.
Well, that's the beautiful thing is, if you don't like that one, you just wait for the next year's vintage, next year's release, and it's going to be completely different again.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome.
Is there
Thanks everyone
any other
for joining us.
Final
Yeah, if you have
questions,
any questions.
for Scott and myself?
Anything about Kentucky, about how to survive a hurricane in a bathtub? Not this time. That's all right. I can tell you.
Very, very quickly. So, whilst I remember, because we're on the theme of American whiskey, so whilst we got the Brisbane show this weekend, that's pretty much sold out, and Scott will see a lot of you guys up there. I'm still TBC. I might pop up. We do have tickets available for the upcoming Sydney American Whiskey Show and Melbourne American Whiskey Show. The Brisbane American Whiskey Show was back in March, and that was awesome and a lot of good fun. And Scott's finalised some epic smoky barbecue, briskets, burgers, all that sort of stuff for Sydney. I imagine something similar for Melbourne, but yeah. What are the dates again, Scott, for Sydney and Melbourne?
Yep. So Sydney is the 23rd of October, and then Melbourne is the 18th of October, I believe, both Saturdays.
Yeah, cool. And then obviously all the big guys will be there. There'll be a lot of new guys. All the new bourbons from Honey Barrel that they're bringing in are coming up. We've got Owen, who used to run Australian Whiskey Auctions. He's now working for a big mob in the States to do rare bourbon collections and all that sort of stuff. He's just bringing his own personal collection to run the rare American whiskey bar in Sydney. So we're just going to have some really cool bourbons and ryes, some American single malts as well, obviously, but those are the ryes and the bourbons are why we're so forthcoming for. So yeah, we'll be there. Looking forward to see you. Reach out if you have any questions about those events as well. Otherwise, we'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. We'll see you real soon.